Tonight I would like to speak about something which I think is one of the most significant events, really, that has ever happened. And obviously, people are walking around with a tremendous amount of doubt as to what in the world all this means. And most people have no concept, of what it really means in its pneumius, which means in its real understanding and so on, So I want to talk about, obviously, the event of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. And I would like to talk about what I think all of this really means. Now remember, what I do is not report events. I'm not a reporter. I'm not a news editor, right? I don't do any of those things. But what I do try to do is interpret it to give you an understanding of how this fits into the divine plan of creation. I connect the dots, which ultimately speaking, I think is what people want to really understand. So therefore, I've entitled this year, The Profound Secret of the Attempted Assassination of Donald Trump and the Hand of God. And do not even think that God was not even involved, which I will show you and so on, So everybody's wondering what is going on. Now there are reports coming out daily about who the shooter was and did he do it for what reason? Is there a conspiracy going on? People have all kinds of conjecture as to what's going on. Before I continue, let me just dedicate the Shiur. This Shiur should be a merit, a blessing, and a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas, Yosef Ruvain, and Yeshaya ben Yisrael, Binyamin Wolf, ben Tzvi Hirsch, and Baruch ben Binyamin Wolf. Also, I'd like to dedicate the Shiur or use the Shiur for Sarah Frida Bas Lubov. And the Bersham should, of course, extend his hashpo, his shefa, to all these people, and so on. In any case, so that's really what the question is. How do we understand the events that occurred on Shabbos? Parshas Chukas. I mentioned that Parsha because there's a tremendous significance of why it happened on that Shabbos, which I will talk about. People, many times, if you ask the right question, that begins to lead you in the right direction. But if you don't ask the right question, then you'll come up basically either empty-handed or you really will make an error in terms of what the answer is. What is the right question to ask that would give us the understanding of why this happened? Now, we all know what happened. Donald Trump conducted a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. There must have been at least 50,000 people at that rally. And all of a sudden, shots rang out. And what was remarkable, is that the bullet pierced his ear instead of his head at the last microsecond, which was astounding. What does that mean? That means that bullet should have gone through his head and killed him instantly. But what happened was, in the nanosecond before that bullet would have gone through his head, he moved his head. And the bullet did not go through his head, which would have instantly killed him. What it did is went through his ear. Now that's incredible. You see, how do we begin to even understand that? And so on. Well, obviously, it's a miracle. I mean, people realize that. What are the odds that he would move his head, right, literally a nanosecond before the bullet would have killed him. I mean, people chalk it off to, coincidence, luck, whatever. But obviously, that's an incredible miracle. So what's very important to understand is who's in charge of miracles. It is only the Ribono Shel Olam. It's only God. But the amazing thing is what this shows is the unimaginable power of God. Who is the one who decides the trajectory of a bullet? It's only God. So we know that the trajectory of the bullet, which was aimed for his head, was headed for his head. You see. But the Ribono Shel Olam, what he did was amazing. He allowed the bullet to travel along that path, right? And then what he would do is move his head in the right direction, and it would hit his ear instead of his head. You see. Now, what was incredible about that is that a quarter of an inch away, if he had not moved his head, a quarter of an inch away, he would have been killed. So can you imagine that he's a quarter of an inch away from dying? Only the Ribono Shel Olam can do that. It's obvious. The question that we have to ask is, why? What does that mean, why? Well, the fact that he survived that assassination attempt clearly indicates that the Ribono Shel Olam did not want him to die. But if that was the case, then why not do it through the normal way? In fact, the reports coming out now, is that they knew about this shooter a half hour, or maybe even earlier, that there was somebody around with a scope in his hand that was already being watched because of suspicion and so on. You see, so all of a sudden, he was already, held under suspicion. So what could have happened, right, if the Russian wanted to save him, is that he could have what? He could have been caught, and that was the end of it. But the Russian didn't want to do that. He wanted to save him, right, through an open miracle. That is the question. Why? When he could have easily done it through normal teva, which is through natural means. They would have stopped him. The Secret Service would have stopped him. And that question leads to a very interesting concept. And in many ways, that's the secret of what this is all about. Clearly, the Ribono Shel Olam wanted to show everybody that not only is he in charge, right, but that he can save anybody anytime he wants, you see. So if that's the case, that would be absolutely incredible. And because he made the miracle so astonishing, clearly he wants everybody to know that this was a miracle. That's what he wants. What we have to try to understand is why. And that's what I would like to explain and elaborate on. You see. The truth is that this all coincides with what I've said before. We understand, and I've said this many times, the concept of Yaakov and Esau, that Esau has a job, you see. And the job of Esau at the end of time is that he will do tshuva. He will repent, you see. And I've gone into this with, just previous shurim, and so on, the previous last 3 or 4 shurim, whatever, and so on, why it is, and so on, But Esau will in the end do tshuva, which is repentance. Not only that, but he has been assigned the job of aiding and assisting Yaakov, or the Jewish people, to complete the tikkun process. And that is a very, very important idea, you see. Now, I mentioned also certain other ideas about Esau. Is the one who saved him, we know Esau became a rasha, and the one who got him back into the tikkun process, or the rectification process, is Yitzchak, you see. Because when Esau appeared before Yitzchak, and previously Yaakov had taken the brachas. When Esau appeared, he said, "Okay, I'm here. I brought you food. Please give me a blessing." And Yitzchak, of course, said, "Who are you?" Right? Because he thought that Yaakov, who took the brachas, was Esau. And now he sees Esau standing in front of him. So he realized, okay, that the brachas, the blessings, which I had mentioned, is really the blessings of Mashiach ben Yosef, because the raw material, and it would give Yaakov, or whoever gave the blessings to, tremendous success over the nations of the world and material success. He realized that Esau is Russia, without going into the elaborate details. And he realized also that if that's the case, then Esau has nothing to do with the process of redemption. Now, Yitzchak loved Esau. We know that, because it says that in the Torah, and so on. For many reasons, without going into it, and so on, and he did not want that to happen. So what he did is he gave Esau a job, a task, he and his descendants, that would be involved in the process of redemption, the tikkun process, the rectification process. And we know that, and he said that when Yaakov sins and his descendants, you will be the chief persecutor, you see, of Yaakov, because then Yaakov needs a kapora. Yaakov needs an atonement. You will be the one that will persecute him and give him that atonement, thereby making Esau part of the tikkun process. You see, even though it's obviously a very severe form, but if Yaakov needs it for the tikkun, right, to have an atonement, a kapora, then that's part of the process. You see, thereby assigning Esau to assist Yaakov, even if it be in a very severe form. So what that meant is that Esau would always be part of the tikkun process. He saved his son Esau, you see, to make him worthy of being in Gan Eden, which the Medrash says he is, and even in Olam Haba, which is remarkable. In any case, and therefore Esau throughout history, either as Rome or as Christianity or as Western civilization, have been the major prosecutors, right, that bring suffering to the Jewish people when God decides that they need a kapora. That's a very, very important idea. Okay. Now, in the end, which is where we are now at, okay, remember, there are two parts to Esau. There's Esau that is evil because Esau became evil. It's called the Rash of Esau, you see. And then there's also the part that will do tshuva. That's called the Tov Sheb Esau, the good part of Esau. Right. And they both coexist at the same time, which is fascinating. In fact, not only that, but we know that Esau became Edom. That's in the Torah. Okay? And Edom, the Gemara says, became Rome. Rome is Esau. Right, that's Edom. And so on, Who is Rome? And I mentioned, Rome, of course, is Christianity. Because Rome adopted the religion. They now represent the nation or the personification of Esau, you see. And that's Christianity. And Christianity, of course, became Western civilization. Because that's really who Western civilization is. Now, Western civilization itself, as I mentioned previously, can be subdivided. Okay. There's the evil of Esau, which is interesting. Who's that? That is Russia. Russia is Western civilization, but it is really the evil of Esau. Okay. Then there's Europe. Now, Europe killed hundreds of millions of Jews over the thousands of years, to 2,000 years. So, Europe, okay, is the second part of Esau, which is basically Christianity, okay. Not that all Christians are evil, of course not. But, certainly a great segment of them can be said to be tremendously anti-Semitic. And we know that just by looking at history and so on, which I had spoken about. So that's also the Rasha of Esau, the evil of Esau. But then there's America, you see. Now, where do we see that? Because each one represents a different character, structure of Esau, right? Esau was a tremendous Baal Gaiva, tremendously arrogant, and so on. So Russia represents the arrogance of Esau. Europe represents the fraud, because they preach one thing, love your neighbor and so on. And of course they go and kill you, you see. They turn the other cheek, and it's your cheek that they turn. And then there's America, which represents the taiva, the pleasure aspect of Esau. So you have all three parts that are really Esau. All of them are Western civilization. And basically all of them are Christian. Even Russia is Christian, it's Christian Orthodox Church, and so on. In any case, but America is different. And that's really what I want to begin to talk about. America is not the same as Russia. It's not the same as Europe. And the truth is that most people don't understand, really, America. Because there's a great deal of questions about America. Why was it formed so late? But like I mentioned, America has the evil of Esau, which is the Rash of Esau. And America also has the Tov of Esau, you see. So the first question you can ask about America, which of course was formed in 1776 and so on, why did God bring a country like America basically at the end of time? Thousands of Europe, and other countries, they've been around for thousands of years, the Middle East and so on. So why did America come in 1776, which is really a latecomer to civilization, you see? And what is the unusual characteristic of America that is different? And the answer to that is very important. America has the Tov Sheb'Esau, right? And that's really the essence of America. And therefore, in 1776, it was miraculous. I mean, George Washington, he had a ragtag army. When you really look at it was incredible. He's fighting against the British soldiers, which is among the most powerful military in the world at that time. How in the world can America even beat them, and so on, and declare the independence from Britain and so on, And here's George Washington. I mean, you look at his army, you can't believe that this is an army, until how long did it take to even gather the soldiers and the pay? And there were people that marched in his army that had no shoes. Can you imagine that? The Delaware River, crossing the Delaware. This is famous stuff, It's a miracle that America won the war. But the answer is, of course, because America in many ways is unique. America is destined to be the Tov Sheb'Esau, and therefore God needs them, because Esau, as a good force, must assist the process of redemption, right? Because that's Esau doing tshuva. That is what it means that Esau repents, you see. And like I told you a long time ago, the ultimate prophecy in Pashas told us, when Rivka goes and asks what's going on, because there's two embryos fighting each other. So the prophets in those days, Yeshiva Shem Be'ever, they say to her, whatever, that they're two great nations and they will split, they will be different. But in the end they say, Rav Yavoy Tzoya, that the older nation, or the older child, right, will serve the younger, which is Esau serving Yaakov. Now, and he does, even according to Yitzchak, he punishes Yaakov, and that's how he serves him, right? But there will come a time when he will truly serve them toward the redemption process, not toward the atonement process. You see, so America, at the beginning, wins miraculously against the British, which is incredible, because they are destined to be the Tov Sheb'Esau, the good part of Esau that will truly help. Now, it's very interesting to look the difference between America and Europe or Britain and so on, England or whatever, and so on. England is basically, like I said, Christian, right? But England, the civilization of England is based on inequality of people. If you think about that, I mean, most of the people, all the thousands of years in England, who controlled the government? Well, besides the Pope, who had a major say in the English governments and so on until Luther came along, right? But they had lords, and so on. They had the fiefdoms and so on. Most of the people were subjected. Most of the people couldn't read or write, and they were tremendously subjected. I wouldn't say slavery, but a tremendous inferior lifestyle. Why? Because they did not hold of the equality of man, as we will see. Along comes America and changes the entire worldview. That what are you guys talking about? America changed the idea, or introduced the idea, that each human being is precious. You see, each person, there's a greatness to each person. You see, there's what's called the majesty and the grandeur, right, and the nobility of the human soul, specifically the human spirit. That was incredible. That was unheard of in the world at that time, In fact, what we begin to see is Jefferson was a brilliant man, right? I mean, he truly was. And you should know one thing. You can see the divine assistance because he allowed them to create. Jefferson and Madison and Adams and all these guys, what's called the founding fathers, they created the two greatest documents almost that was ever conceived in the mind of man. What are they? One is the Declaration of Independence, right? And the other is the Constitution. They are masterpieces of thought, you see, and human dignity. Tremendous, And God gave the wisdom to these people. You see, He gave the wisdom to create documents that would allow a nation to exist that fosters life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And the way Jefferson wrote it is incredible, that the Creator has endowed them, each person, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's an incredible concept that was unknown in Europe and so on. The idea of the greatness of the human spirit, that was America. And it was manifested and created as a document by Thomas Jefferson, right? Which is the Declaration of Independence, written approximately, July 4th, 1776, whatever. And then it was created, the Constitution was created, I think, in 1787, two unbelievable documents and so on, that did what? That magnified and personified and exemplified the beauty of the human spirit. That was America. Why? Because America is destined to be the Tov Shebei Esau. You see? So God therefore brings them out at the end of time, because it is only at the end of time that Esau will emerge, right, as a good person. And his main job, we will see, right, is to assist Yaakov. But he's got other jobs, you see, which is really very, very important. What job does he have? You should know the Gemara says that Ein ben David bo, that the Mashiach ben David will only come in Sanhedrin. Kulam chayobim, everybody has to be guilty of sin, or kulam zakoyim, everybody has merit and so on. Like I once said, which is really very interesting and so on. But there's something else that's very important. There are two Mashiachim, which we know, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, we know. And there's a tremendous difference between the two. What is the difference? That Mashiach ben Yosef will come in one of two ways. If Kulam Chayovim, if Mashiach ben Yosef comes because of the Jews sinning, that's Chayovim, they are guilty of sinning, then he will come through Teva, natural means. Now, of course, God is behind it all, but it will look natural. It won't be open miracles, you see. That's Mashiach ben Yosef. But if the Jews are tzaddikim, righteous people, then the Mashiach ben Yosef will come miraculously, open miracles, and he will have extraordinary powers, abilities. So it all depends how he comes, depends on the acts of the Jews. You see? But in any case, he has to come. So here's the problem, which is a very interesting problem. If the Jews sin, and the majority of Jews sin, which unfortunately and tragically is what's happening today, then we know Mashiach ben Yosef is going to come, right? Not through, it'll always be miraculous, but it will not be cloaked in miracles. You see, it'll look like, ordinary natural causes and so on. You see? But then the problem is, he himself has to grow, which I once explained, and so on, you see? So if that's the case, if he himself has to grow, how is he going to, and he's going to come through natural means, how's he going to fight the nations? Remember, I once said that there's a whole series of steps that have to be taken of change of the world. One is that evil has to be obliterated and eradicated. A second thing is the world has to become good. That's the concept of good versus evil, where the world actually becomes good, you see, but not righteous. Righteousness is a whole different, what's called darga. It's an entirely different level of behavior of a person. You see? And that's what it says in the Torah, actually. Tzedek, tzedek tirdoif. Righteousness you shall pursue, which by the way means that just like the end has to be justified, the means also has to be justified. But in any case, righteousness is a step toward the Messianic age. But then the next step is not righteousness, it's holiness, you see. So the non-Jews have to become righteous, but only the Jews can introduce holiness into creation. Like it says, Kedoshim Tiyu, you shall be holy. That's a tremendous difference between the mission of the Jews and the mission of non-Jews who are righteous. Big difference, and so on. So the question then is, if the Mashiach comes, right, through Teva, which is natural means, right, and not miraculously, which is open miracles, then how is he going to fight the nations? How is he going to get rid of them? You see? Without getting into it, because he himself begins from a low stature. Without getting into that, there'll be a future shiur and so on, So how's he going to get rid of evil? And the answer is Esau. Now we understand why you need Esau. There has to be somebody, right, who is part of the concept of Esau, who does tshuva, who does repent, right? He is going to assist Mashiach ben Yosef, right, to rid evil. That's why you need an Esau if the Mashiach ben Yosef comes through natural means. Now, that's Mashiach ben Yosef. And now you understand why you need Esau assisting him. You see, because it's all natural. But Mashiach ben David is different. He's miraculous. You see, if all of a sudden a nation wants to commit evil, then the Mashiach ben David, through his mouth, he will say, that nation deserves to die. And they will immediately be obliterated. He lives by miracles, openly, because the world will have changed at the time of Mashiach ben David. That is miraculous. And therefore, the Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead, and not only that, the Satan will be killed. In that era of the Mashiach ben David, the Davidic Messiah, the whole generation will be completely miraculous. So when the Gemara refers that Ein ben David, or that there's no difference, right, in terms of the Messianic age and now, I think Shmuel says that, right? It refers to Mashiach ben Yosef, you see, because Shmuel is really saying that he's going to come probably through Teva, because the Jews, unfortunately, will have sinned. But Mashiach ben David is different. There you witness open miracles. I mean, imagine going to a cemetery and everybody gets up from the dead. But what are we talking about here? This is no longer concealed miracles, and so on, which is really, when you really think about that, it's incredible. Now we understand why you need an Esau helping Yaakov, you see, because Mashiach ben Yosef comes through Teva, That's what happens, you see. In any case, so God is going to prepare a nation to be what? Tov Shebei Esav. Now you understand the logic of it. So all of a sudden in 1776, right, there's this American colonies, 13 colonies decide to go to war against the strongest nation in the world, Britain, England, right? Whatever, and so on. And they fight them and they win with basically a ragtag army. It's miraculous. And that sets the tone. You see? That's what America is. And Jefferson wrote this brilliant document that the Creator, they recognize, right? God. And he says the Creator of man has endowed him with tremendous rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which was basically unknown in England, you see, and so on, which anybody who studies European history realizes. It was all about kings and queens and fiefdoms, right, and lords and so on, all these kind of guys. And besides Jefferson writing about this and so on, you have the Constitution that makes America laws not based on the whims of a king, which is quite risky, and so on, or the self-interest of a king. No, it's based on the Constitution, which means that it's based on absolute law, absolute justice, that doesn't bend, right, to the self-interest of a governor or the self-interest of a president. And then they come up with this brilliant idea to have three parts of the government. Checks and balances, which is really in many ways what saves America. So one person cannot take over the American government and then subject themselves, right, to the tyranny of one of the aspects of the government, which is the president or the Congress or even the Supreme Court. Tragically, today we see the violation of the wisdom of the founding fathers. In any case, so one thing we can now see, that is why America formed at the end, because it's only at the end, right, that the Tikkun process is complete, and you need to prepare a nation that will be the Tov Shebei Esav, the good part of Esau, and they will assist the Mashiach ben Yosef and the Jews to really fight their enemies, which is classically what is happening. But you also see something else which is very interesting, that God will protect this nation called America. And one of the ways he does that is he makes America unbelievably rich, wealthy, with the tremendous resources. Why do you think America is one of the greatest nations the world has ever seen? Because that is the blessing, right? First of all, it's the blessing, that Yitzchak should have given Esau in that sense. But it's really the blessing that Esau has to have in order to fulfill his mission of doing what? Of assisting the world of becoming more righteous and so on. Very important idea. And that's why every once in a while, God slaps America in the face, because it has to correct it, or else it won't happen. Esau won't do tshuva. And that's why you have the Civil War. What America did with the Civil War is terrible. What does that mean? How can you say, they have been endowed by the Creator with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and have a slave? You see? Now people make a tremendous mistake. The Torah, which they call the Bible, right? Well, it permits slavery. Of course not. That's ridiculous. It permits slavery. There are reasons why a person will want to become a slave. Either because he needs the money, you see, and therefore he sells himself. Slavery is nothing more than a permanent, in one Evet Kanani, is a permanent, employee. That's all it is. But the guy has to be willing to do it, to sell himself as a permanent employee, which is a slave. You see, or he has to be guilty, let's say, of theft, and he has no money to pay back. So therefore, he has to pay back. But after 6 years, he's free. You see? So they don't think, it's not slavery what they did at the time of the colonies, where they kidnapped, which is a death penalty, by the way, in the Ten Commandments, where they kidnapped blacks from Africa. How dare they do that? Are they crazy? Even if the the blacks in Africa were obviously of a much greater primitive status. You can't kidnap them and then subject them to what? To terrible vicissitudes and suffering of slavery. They needed a kapara. So God says, listen, a nation that will give rise and help the Jews must have a kapara, must have an atonement. Guess what? What's the atonement? The civil war. Right. God always makes sure that this can still happen, that there can be a Tov Shebe Esau. In other words, America is being watched by God because they have to emerge. Ultimately, America itself has to emerge as part of the Messianic process, which is a very, very important thing, you see. In other words, America is unusual. They recognize the greatness, like I say, the majesty of the human spirit. You want to call it rugged individualism, whatever you want to call it. But America prides itself on the individual. And in the end, that's really what a democracy is, where the people decide. Why? Because they have the wisdom and the dignity to decide. Very different. Europe is filled with monarchies, right? Or dictators and so on, you know. And of course, America's, that's the whole concept, basically, of America and so on, you see. In any case, in other words, they understood the concept of Tzelem Elokim, that man is made in the image of God. That's unusual about America. That is the greatness of really of the whole the concept. So God is always careful to clean up America, right? Whether you like it or not, He's got to clean up America, and He did so many times. Why do you think we had a depression for, where America was really terribly off economically for many years? And basically it was only World War II that got us out of the depression, because America had to be cleaned up for whatever sins it did and so on. All these calamities and tragedies are because God watches over America, because America has to give birth to, so to speak, the person that will lead America to help to get rid of the evil of the world and so on. You see, that's what America is really all about, which is really very important. Now we begin to understand Trump. Once you understand that it's not Trump, it's America, it's the concept of the Tov Shebe Esau, the good part of Esau. It's the concept of Rav Yavo Itzoyer, the older will serve the younger. And this is destined to be at the end of time. Now you begin to understand what happened with Trump. Trump, although he's in many ways a very interesting person, highly unusual and so on and so forth, but God has blessed him in many, many ways. But at the same time, God looks at Trump and He has to clean him up. And I mentioned before many times, Trump is that person that is destined to lead America. So just like God has to clean up America when they have to be cleaned up, be atoned, He has to do the same thing to Trump. You see, now there is something that Trump says, which is famous: make America great again. That's a tremendous mistake. Why? Of course you want security and wealth and prosperity for America. There's no question about that. And that's fine. That's great. And so on. But that's not what's on the agenda of God. God is not interested in wealth. He determines who is wealthy. He determines who prospers, right? And who is successful. That's not what He wants. What He wants is good and not evil. What He wants is what? Is the concept of righteousness. That's what He wants. How man acts to man. That's what God is interested in. You see that all over the Torah. You see, He wants holiness. He wants you to be not only dignified and, have a great civilization. He wants you to be what? A righteous person, where you will love your neighbor. You see, where you will respect all people and be fair and just and honest. That's what He wants. Make America great again doesn't really sound like that, does it? And it's wrong. the mission of America, which is why America was founded in the first place, which I've just said, is to remove evil from the world, right? Now you understand why all the nations are afraid of Trump, because that's exactly what he's going to do. He's going to stand up to all of them, Iran, China, North Korea, and Russia, right? And they will all be frightened of him, you see, because that's the power of Esau doing good. That's what he wants, you see. But make America great again, what Trump has to understand, that's not what God wants. In fact, Trump has to understand this. He has to reason this. Wait a minute. And he does. Not totally. I'd be interested to tell him this. Listen, God saved you, not by a miracle, by an open miracle. I mean, everybody sees that. It's just unbelievable. Even the biggest atheist has to say, wow, that's unbelievable to move your head a quarter of an inch right before the bullet strikes your head and would have split your head in two, right? That's absolutely incredible. You see, even they begin to understand that God is in charge. This is not normal. But he has to reason and says, wait a minute. If God saved me, he himself, and Trump did say that, only God saved me. He actually did say that. Great. But then what about the next question? Why? Why did God save me? And why did he do it as an open miracle? Right? Which is, there's no doubt of what he did. And he has to come to the answer. Because maybe I have a divine mission that he wants. What is that mission? Is it to make America great? Well, I'm sure it is to a certain extent. But is that really what he wants? That everybody should be prosperous and make a ton of money? No. God is not concerned with wealth. Because he's the one who gives you the money altogether. Not a problem of him, of his. You see, what God wants is character. He wants righteousness. And he wants holiness. So therefore, maybe I have a divine mission. Now you understand why God did it openly. Right. Because like this, you cannot reason that way. But if you know that God openly saved you with an unbelievable miracle, and this was, it's called a Nes Niglo, then your next conclusion is maybe, therefore, he did it for a reason. Right? What is that reason? Well, what is God interested in? You see, you just have to look at the Torah, what God says all the time. Righteousness is what I want. You should pursue. Kedoshim Tiyu, holiness. Therefore, what Trump now has to do, right, is the concept of what? Is that America now has to become justice. I mean, this administration, without mentioning the characters in the administration, has destroyed the fabric of justice. Terrible. Justice is a mockery. We see that. Everybody sees that. Not only with what happened to Trump. There's unbelievable amount of prosecutorial overcharge and so on, prosecutorial abuse all the time. I mean, there's no justice in America. You could sit here for the next half year figuring out the injustice of America, which of course is absurd. So this White House administration, we all know who is in there, has made justice a mockery. Without justice, there's no civilization. You see? But it's not only that. I mean, it's insane how one person can destroy America in 3.5 years. It's incredible. We take a look. 10 million people have come into the border, right? It's unbelievable. What kind of a country is this? It's almost laughable how they can allow this because of the whims or the self-interest of the president. It's impossible. It's absurd. And not only that, he's mandated by law to protect. Then you have all the human trafficking. We have no idea how much human trafficking is done on the border daily, right? And the cartels, they have taken over America. And what about the 130,000 people, American citizens, that die every day. That means the White House is complicit in murder, of which they will someday suffer grievously. You see, how many people die from fentanyl, and it's all over the United States. It's incredible. Then you look at the mockery of law by DAs, district attorneys, in all the major cities of America. What is this? It's anarchy. And they're allowed to continue doing it. You look at the bar of the law bar of many states, and they don't do anything. You see, this is an incredible mockery of justice. You see, I'm not even talking about the economy. You know how many people suffer because of the inflation? And it's all caused by the acts of one man. And then the economy. If you spend trillions of dollars, then countries of the world will no longer use the dollar as a reserve currency. That's incredibly dangerous. You see, I'm not even going at the gas prices or energy prices and so on, and that we become the laughing stock of the world. How can America convince the world to stop the evil if America has become the laughing stock? You see, in any case, what is happening is beyond belief. You see, and the people in the White House refuse to get off, and so on. You see, all of them will suffer grievously for what they've done to civilization, right? And I'm not even going into the degradation of morality. You see, the LGBTQ guys and so on, the transsexuals, what's happening in our schools, you see, and what happens in the college. And what about all the anti-Semitism, right? What is going on here and so on? This is not what God wants. You see, who's going to clean up this mess? And the answer is the Tov Sheba Esau. Because his job is to set America on the real path of righteousness. That's what his job is. And God, in a certain sense, is speaking to Trump. And he's saying, listen, I'm going to save you openly so you won't doubt that it's me. But if that's the case, you have to ask yourself, why? Not only why God is saving me, but why in such an open display of his might? And the answer is because maybe I have to do a divine mission, or a mission of morality and ethics and goodness and so on. You want to make America great again? Fine. So then make it great, right? The way it was written in the Declaration of Independence. And certainly the way it's written in the Torah, even though it refers to the Jews, but believe me, that applies also. So now we have the answer why God decided to save him openly, miraculously, and so on. And we understand now, what the special job of what? Of America is. Now, but you have to remember one thing. This isn't the only miracle. Any fool could see what's happening. They take a look at Trump. They can't believe all these miracles of Trump. It's not just that he was saved. And what are the miracles of Trump? Think about it. Okay? Here's a guy who runs, he's a businessman. And he's running against a woman that has world recognition, Hillary. And he beats her, which nobody could believe. You see. So that, in many ways, is the first miracle, openly. Then he beats 16 opponents. They are governors, senators, and he beats them. You see. What about the indictments? How is it possible that all 4 indictments are either dismissed or delayed? It's unbelievable how he just walks away from all the indictments. You don't think that's a miracle? And then he's impeached, right? He's still impeached, right? They try to bankrupt the guy, right? By get him to pay $180 million? Are they out of their mind? What kind of a sentence is that? And you talk about cruel and unusual punishment. You have to laugh at this, right? And the incredible miracle that every time something happens to him, right, he goes up in the polls, right? Anybody else would have been finished after the first indictment. And this guy, after the impeachments, tried to bankrupt the guy, court cases, right? And so on. And then at every rally, the guy's got 50,000 people. Biden is lucky if he has 20 people. And this guy's got 50,000, 100,000 people. And also what is unusual, people do not realize that, What surrounds Trump is a Messianic fever. They relate to him. You have to see, people are crying, thanking God that he's alive. Really? Why? You could feel sorry that somebody was assassinated, fine. But you don't cry over it, and you don't express, it's Messianic. You see, the only one who had that is when Obama ran, which is very interesting. When Obama ran for president, there was also that Messianic fervor. Why? Well, there are natural ideas, but the real reason, I believe, is that when God gave Obama a chance, right, to rein in the Arabs, the Muslims, right? And it's amazing, the first thing he did was give a speech for the Arabs and against Israel. And he hates the Jews anyway, he hates Israel and so on. You see, this is Obama. Why? Because God, and not only that, but he gave him the Congress, the House and the Senate, and he was president. Obama could have done what Trump does, right? He doesn't realize, but God gave him a chance, you see, to do what the Tov Shebei Esau, even though fundamentally he's not Esau, he's really a Muslim, and so on. But he gave him the power, without getting into it, and so on. But he, of course, destroyed his entire ability. Someday he'll find out what he missed and so on. But that's also, you saw a Messianic fervor with Obama. But you see the same thing with Trump, which is, when you think about that, incredible. But then you take a look at this guy, Trump. He's 78 years old. Where does he get his energy from? He doesn't sleep. Or maybe he sleeps 4 hours. He's 78 years old. By the way, that's an old man, basically, even though people may make it to their 90s and 100s or whatever and so on. Where does he get his energy from? He's got to walk around with batteries connected to his heart and so on, And then it's not only that. You have an idea what it is to be indicted 4 times? And he has the entire U.S. government against him. Not one agency, the whole thing. He's got the DOJ, Department of Justice, against him. The FBI, the CIA, the IRS, right? And the NSA, right? They're all after him. I mean, how do you withstand the onslaught and the almost infinite resources of the government? It's unbelievable. How come he didn't have 5 heart attacks by now? Any guy would have collapsed on the one, right? And so on. Yet he seems to be able to go on. And then, of course, finally, and he's always been badmouthed by the Democrats, which is incredible. And then finally, they can't get rid of this guy. This guy, every time you put him down, I think there's a doll where he keeps popping up. I once saw a doll like that, right? It's like a pop-up, right? Whatever you do to the guy, he keeps popping up. So finally, they decide to shoot him. I'm not saying it was a conspiracy, but finally, which is obviously the logical conclusion, and so on. You don't think these are miracles? Any normal person, any person, would have been long ago rejected as being a candidate. But what's interesting is when it happened. And I will tell you something really very interesting. It happened on the Shabbos of Parshas Chukas. So you can ask me, well, what's significant about that? I will tell you. Because in that Parsha, right, Moshe Rabbeinu is headed with the Jews, of course, to Israel. But in order to do a shortcut, he wants to go through the lands of Edom, Esau. So here's what he says. Koyama ochicha, thus says your brother, Israel. So Rashi says, why? And he says, please let us go to your land. We won't touch anything, but it's a shortcut to go to Eretz Israel. This is Edom, which is Esau. So Edom says, nope, can't do it. If you do that, we'll go to war with you and so on. So Rashi says, why is he saying, thus say your brother Israel, right? Why now mention brotherhood, you see? And the reason for that is because Rashi brings this medrash down, which is incredible. Because really, he says, Moshe Rabbeinu was saying to Edom, listen, that idea that God said to Avram Avinu, right, that your children will be in the land for hundreds of years, in the land that they don't know. Who was responsible to fulfill that prophecy? And the answer is Yaakov and his descendants, and also Esau, right? He's the brother, and I mentioned previously that Esau is a Nov. He had the same obligation, you see. So what did Esau do? He cast aside that responsibility or obligation, that he has to also go in the Golus, in the exile, and he threw it on Yaakov. So what Moshe is saying, wait a minute, we did you the favor. We accepted the prophecy, right? That we had to suffer in Egypt for 210 years, right? And you threw it off, right? So at least let us do us a favor by letting us go to your land. You see? That's what Moshe Rabbeinu said. Yeah, but that's incredible. So what did Esau say? They rejected it. But the question is, what kind of a statement is that really? So because they could say, wait a minute, it's true that we had the obligation, but so what? Our forefather Esau, right? He ditched it. He threw it off and finished. We're not part of the tikkun process anymore. So what do you want? So what was Moshe Rabbeinu's claim? And the answer is no. You are still part of the tikkun process, because that's what Yitzchak did to Esau, where he said that you will be the major persecutor. So Yitzchak, by the blessings, kept Esau in the whole parsha, in the whole idea that he's part of the tikkun process. So if that's the case, let us through your land. You see, that's the very parsha that God allowed this sniper to shoot Trump. What does that mean? Because maybe this is the parsha that's the turnaround. All of a sudden God says, I must warn Trump that he has to assume or understand that my request of him is divine. It's not simple to make people prosperous. No, I want a whole different kind of man. I want man who recognizes the greatness of man and will act, as they say in Yiddish, like a mensch, right? Where they will love one another. I need brotherhood, unity in America, because that's the country that will do my bidding and my charge. You see, and it happens on the very parsha that Edom rejected it, because maybe that's the parsha that Edom is now accepting it, and God is in many ways talking to Trump and so on. You see, in any case, what do we see so far? We see just incredible ideas. You now understand why this is happening, because it's a message to Trump, and in certain ways, it's a message to America. This is not chance. This isn't random. This is me, God says, talking, that I want you to clean up your act. Not in wealth, which of course is very important. I'm not saying that it's not. But that's not what God wants. God wants righteousness. He wants holiness. He doesn't want these shenanigans that America is doing. Because America, I hate to say it, under Biden, has incredibly deteriorated in many ways to an evil nation. You see, and remember what America really is and what the job is. And God will not tolerate that, you see. So therefore, miraculously, God wants Trump to lead America, to stand up to the entire world, you see. And they will therefore assist the Mashiach ben Yosef to do his job. Because Mashiach ben Yosef will come. How? He will come through the entire Teva, through the natural means, which is very interesting. Now, let me tell you something else, which is very important. This guy shot at Trump in the head. Why the head? Sounds like a strange question. Well, that's how you can kill somebody very easily. No, it's much more profound than that. Let me tell you something. According to the Kabbalah, the soul of man has 5 parts. One part, where do they reside? So the neshama of man, and it's also the nefesh of a goy, of a non-Jew, who also has a divine soul. What's called the lowest part of the neshama is called the nefesh. That resides in the liver, right? So the Chazal say, it's pre-Kabbalah, according to the Kabbalistic thinking. Okay, the ruach, which is part 2, that resides in the heart. Then there's what's called the neshama, a specific part, 3rd part, and each one is higher than the other. That resides in the brain. Then there's 2 more parts. One is called the chaya, and that surrounds the body like an aura. It's not in any one organ. And then the yechida, that's the 5th part and the greatest, is not at all connected to the body, but it is the link to the divine, to the Shekhinah itself. Where's the neshama? I said in the head, right? Now, that's the first thing you have to know. So the essence of man, in a certain sense, which is neshama, resides in the head, right? And that's where the brain is and so on. We now, of course, understand why the greatness of man, his ability to be rational, is in the head. When they were burying Yaakov Avinu, they're coming to bury him in the cave of Machpelah. Now, there are 4 couples in that cave. One is Adam and Chava. Would you believe this? Adam and Chava are buried in the Moras HaMachpelah. The original 2 people. It's amazing. And then you have Avram, right, and Sarah, the patriarchs. You have Yitzchak and Rivka. And you have Yaakov and Leah. All 4 are in the Moras HaMachpelah. Why? Because in that Moras HaMachpelah is the shroshim, the roots of the souls of all mankind. All mankind is Adam and Chava, and the Jewish people is the 3 patriarchs and the matriarchs. Rachel, of course, who is the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef, is in the Klippa. Klippa means she has to be among the Tumah in order to provide a kapara, an atonement for the Jewish people. Without getting into that's the mother of Mashiach ben Yosef. But in any case, therefore, what do we see? Now, they're coming to bury Yaakov Avinu. This is a medrash, right? And all of a sudden, right, Esau shows up, right? Because Yaakov Avinu is his brother. He shows up and says, wait a minute. And he starts to protest. You can't bury Yaakov in the last plot because there was only 1 plot left, all right? Leah had died previously, so there was 1 plot that was going to be for Yaakov, right? He says he interferes with the entire burial. You can't do that. And there's an entire huge entourage that are going to bury Yaakov Avinu because he was held in unbelievable esteem by the Egyptians. All right? So he actually held up the whole burial process of Yaakov Avinu, right? Now, so they say, what are you talking about? We bought it, right, from Ephraim, the Hittite, the Hittite, and so on. So they assign Naphtali to go and bring the contract. So Naphtali was incredibly fast. Whatever, so he had to run to bring the contract that shows that Yaakov Avinu, right, Avram bought it and he's giving it to Yaakov and so on, the burial place. So all of a sudden there's somebody called Hushim. His name was Hushim ben Dun, the son of Dun, right? And he couldn't speak and he couldn't hear, so on. So he doesn't know what's going on. He says, what are they doing? And he couldn't hear what was the argument going on, right? And he couldn't speak. But he said to himself, what kind of unbelievable degradation this is to the great Yaakov Avinu, my grandfather. What are these guys doing? Are they crazy? You see? So Dun, right? Chushim ben Dun, as they say in Hebrew, doesn't know any chachma. He says, what in the world is this? So he takes a sword, right? Without asking anybody. And he looks at Esau, right? He's going to chop his head off, right? That's called action, right? But he couldn't do it. Why? Because Esau and Yaakov are twins. So he looks just like Yaakov, Imagine that. And this is years later, I mean, obviously, a long time. So he couldn't chop his head off because he couldn't look at Esau from the front. So what does he do? Hushim ben Dun. He goes around the back, off his head. What happened to the body? So they take the body of Esau. He's dead. And of course, they buried him outside. He doesn't belong there because he's not a part of the patriarchs. He's a Rasha, right? So all of a sudden, the head of Esau, which is now off his body, rolls away. Rolls away. And nobody seems to notice this. What happened to his head, right? So they bury Yaakov, and the head is at the feet of Yaakov Avinu. Both of them are dead, but the head of Esau is at the feet of Yaakov Avinu. Why? How did Esau's head merit to be in that holy place? I mean, it's incredible. And the answer is, because the only thing about Esau that was holy was his head. That's the neshama, right? That contains the neshama. And that is the aspect or the essence of Esau that had some retention of holiness is in his head, right? And the body they could discard. But God saw fit, and it was all Hashkafa, that the head of Esau should be with the others, right? Which should be with the patriarchs and the matriarchs. That's the head of Esau, right? If you want to stop Trump, where do you shoot him? In the head. Because the head is the one that does tshuva. That's the good part of Esau. You see, that is the one that does tshuva, repents, right? And that's exactly where the guy tried to kill him, unknowingly, or rather unbeknownst to what the importance of the head is. Because that's the neshama, you see. So Trump was a Gilgal in many ways, which I said before, ultimately of Esau, or Antoninus, right? So the essence of Trump is his head. So therefore, the sniper aims for his head to stop him, basically, from engaging in the task of Esau, which means Esau will serve Yaakov Avinu. But we know something else. But instead he missed, and he got his ear. Why? If God wanted to save Esau, right? He could have moved him another quarter of an inch, right? And he would have missed his ear. What is the symbolism of the ear? And the answer is because God is saying to Trump, remember, you have a divine mission to save America, to make it into a righteous place, and to rid the world of evil. Right? Do it. But do not listen to anybody else, because there are many people that are going to tell you, don't do it. You're acting too harsh or too severe. You know, there's always naysayers around, all right? So God is saying, if you listen to these people, you will cause blood, right? You will cause the destruction of many people, you see? So the ear is damaged. Be careful. Don't listen to people, because people are going to tell you that you're too severe or too harsh. Be careful. So therefore his ear is injured, but not his head, because the head is where the spirit lies, the neshama, you see? But God had to warn him, be careful. Don't listen to advice of people, you see? And therefore his ear is all bloodied and so on, you know. I always find it incredible how God talks to people with the exact message that they have to hear. But in any case, we now understand many things. The importance of America. And I want to tell you something. It's not because I'm an American citizen. It's not because, you know, this is what I see because I have loyalty to America, which I do. But that's not what it is. We now understand the incredible divine plan of what is going on. And the amazing thing is God does this right before the convention, Republican National Convention. Why? Because God says, before I assign you physically and legally you must hear this lesson, not after you become the candidate, right? The nomination. You need to hear this message before and figure out, based on the fact that it's an open miracle. We now understand many things, who America really is, why they seem to be divinely protected. Not only that, why they're so successful, and why everybody's afraid of America, you see, because they are destined to help Mashiach ben Yosef, because the redemption is going to come through natural means. That's how it's going to come, you see. And therefore, if that's the case, natural means, then Mashiach ben Yosef needs an assist, right, from somebody that the world will shake at. And we know they all shake in fear, because to them, Trump is what? Unpredictable. So this is the idea I wanted to share with everybody, the logic of what's happening and why. I do hope, of course, that Trump will hear this message and realize that his mission is much greater than making people wealthy, which is admirable. I'm not saying no in any way, to alleviate the burdens of people, because really it's a Rahmanas on people. I mean, could you imagine 60% of America cannot make ends meet, or they live from paycheck to paycheck? Could you imagine the anxiety that people have all over America, all created by this demented president? It's just incredible, the harm and the damage. I'm not even going into his stance on abortion, which is murder. To allow abortion of a child 1 hour before it's born? Is there a difference between the embryo before it's born and after it's born? There's only an hour difference. So this is murder and this is not? Give me a break. You see, I'm not even going into the fentanyl murders and all that, and so on. I mean, that the government, all the evil of people that support the president to elect him, I don't even want to talk about what their punishment will be, because it's going to be severe, because we are looking at a person, the White House, the president and so on, that have incredible amount of blood on their hands, evil on their hands, suffering of people for nothing, when so many things were going so well, and so on. In any case, so this, I wanted to share with everybody that makes logic and makes sense about what is happening. Thank you.